Hello, I'm Eric Schmid, a shareholder in Elliott Davis's manufacturing and distribution practice. Today, we're continuing our multi-part management consulting video series that is geared to a manufacturing and distribution audience. We've titled the series An Operational Discussion, and today we've got the second installment, which is Growing the Top Line. The next two installments after today's will be cost reduction and improving operational performance. The subject of growing the top line, it's really a non-negotiable for pretty much every business, but we have to acknowledge the impact that COVID is having. And while we don't know the specific impact on any specific business, the reality is it's clearly having an impact, and it's introduced a lot of uncertainty. And that uncertainty sort of erodes a business's ability to forecast with confidence, to predict things, and ultimately that translates to risk. And in light of that, it's our view that almost every business could benefit right now or in the near term from a revisiting of the topic of top line and how you move the top line. So for today's video, I'm joined by Ryan Lovelace. He's a director in our management consulting practice. He's got experience and insights that are very pertinent to the topic we have on the table today. And with that, Ryan, I'm going to hand over to you for just a quick intro of yourself and the consulting practice, and then we'll jump into the content.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'll just quickly mention, you highlighted that this is an important topic right now. This is something that's always important to me and I think relevant for companies, but certainly I would second that, with everything that's taking place with COVID, this is where, it's an exercise worth going through right now, for sure. So I hope that we'll provide some helpful content to those that are listening. But as Eric mentioned, I'm Ryan Lovelace. I'm a director in our management consulting practice. I sit in our Greenville office. Previously, I worked for the Boston Consulting Group, and before that, I was with GE. The topics I work with clients on are things like growth strategy, 5-year planning, transformations, and M&A. And just kind of speaking broadly about the management consulting practice as a whole, we have 4 practice areas that we focus on: strategy, operations, M&A, and IT.
Okay, good. Appreciate that. So kind of jumping into the first question, this question might on the surface sound a tad self-serving, but I think it's an important thing, and it really gets at a question of mindset. So, a lot of successful business leaders, I think, are open to outside input. They realize that's important, but at the same time, generally, you're talking about folks that are very seasoned, they're very confident, maybe inherently skeptical of things that are different and challenge the status quo. And so that could lead to a mindset of, look, I know my business, I'm an expert on my business, I know what works, I know what doesn't work. It's implausible that a third party has the ability to tell me something I don't already know. And furthermore, I get paid to know this stuff, I get paid to do it. And so seeking input from a third party could be sort of a de facto declaration of some kind of weakness or shortcoming on the part of that leader. So Ryan, think about that leader I just described who holds a form of that view, and just what's the talking point to that person in terms of thinking about the top line?
Yeah, it's a valid point, and certainly a valid question. I think there's 2 things that I would respond with as it relates. And one is, I think hiring a third party or bringing a third party in does provide an objective view on the topic. There's no internal relationship dynamics, no aspect of, well, this is the way we've done it, and so this should logically be a starting point. You can really actually start from scratch, and there's no bias that exists as it relates to looking at the topic. So that's one. The second and bigger thing actually gets around how we think about the scope for these types of engagements. And I'll just speak a little bit. My goal in something like this is to gather data, both internal and external, and then work with business leaders to help make the right decision for the organization. And so ultimately, in these I'm hopeful that as we talk further on the topic, it'll be clear that what we're providing is really the structure and additional data that can help leaders move forward, and get insights that weren't there previously, or weren't able to be uncovered by current business operations or processes that are going about this. There's no, here's what Ryan says after 6 weeks of going out on his own and looking at your internal data, and so you do A, B, and C. It's really a collaborative effort throughout the process, and so, I think there's a little bit of a different way of looking at it, and that's how I get it. It's not a criticism of business leaders to hire help here.
Okay, so let's say someone is open to re-examining the broad topic of the top line. How do you actually go about doing that?
Yeah, it's such a open-ended question, and I think one of the things that I think of is too often we misframe how we look at it or how we think about it in asking the right question of how do I grow the top line, and what I mean by that is you go to the very near end. Well, what should my sales organization be doing in order to get a few percentage points on sales, or a new channel that they should be looking at, or you go to the other extreme, which is some comment is made like, we're going to be the next Apple in how we innovate. And that also never gets much traction because no one in that context understands what the first step is in getting there. So while I think that ultimately you'll want to work with the sales organization as part of growing the top line, and there may be a bold idea of getting you on that path to really being innovative, what the first thing that we do is really provide structure and improve the process or exercise that you go through in order to answer this question about how I can grow the top line. And so what does that process look like? Well, one, it starts with establishing a baseline for where you are today. So this is questions like, what is our value proposition? Where do I fit into the market? Who are my customers and what are they looking for? And who are my competitors? And then from there, you can get to some short-term levers that exist to improve revenue of, what are marketing efforts that I can take, and which products should I be pushing, and how should I do that? To sales efforts of look at the sales channels that you're using and thinking through different ways to deliver the product to customers. From a pricing perspective of what model am I using for pricing my products, and what should it be? And then you get to that third step of identifying long-term growth opportunities. And this starts with really understanding your company's right to win, getting to an assessment of new markets and trends in the industry as a way to inform, and then from there, setting a path to growth based on certain investments and capabilities that you have relative to what the market data is telling you is an opportunity that exists in the marketplace.
Okay, you kind of got at the concept there earlier on about baseline, establishing baseline, understanding like who are my customers, and in a way that sounds like super elementary. I referenced early on the seasoned executive. Like that person's going to know all of that already. So what do you mean about the baseline?
Yeah. So certainly, companies know their commercial go-to-market strategy, or that's the assumption. When I think about a typical manufacturing company, though, they might have really good insights on what their customer experience is. You might have gotten feedback on your sales team of, oh, I like, Joe because he does X, Y, Z, or my customer service department. I have a really great experience whenever I deal with your customer service. But what you don't know, or what a typical manufacturer doesn't know, is how does that customer experience that they provide compare to competitors? And there's really no way to go about getting that data, right? Like you have to ask your customers or prospective customers that didn't choose you. And so your information there is limited and biased, of they're not going to give you a straight answer necessarily. And this sort of lack of data or information is true across the industry. And so if I can give an example, I worked on a project very recently where we helped a client understand how their product and customer interaction compared to competition. And so what we started with is actually mapping the customer journey, identifying all the touch points from sales and marketing to customer service to product delivery, and found several areas where they differed from their competition. Some where they scored better than competitors, some where they scored worse. But as an example, in this particular industry, one of the things that came to the top was it's custom to send out mailers. So you can think of like actually sending mail to customers, via FedEx or UPS, and that's just a way of marketing, and you get some sort of engagement there. And one of the things that happened is their scores on this particular mailer were just much lower than others in their industry. And so we did the very logical thing of, well, let's take a look at ours. And then we actually got mailers from the other competitors and just looked at them side by side. And it was very clear in looking at that one of them was like it had been developed back in the 1980s and never updated. And the other one is something that was clearly your competitors are focusing on this because they realize that's a path to customers and are thinking about it as being, the first recognition that you have. And so we there worked with the business leaders and worked with marketing to redesign the mailer, and we're ultimately able to get engagement up on this particular avenue by 30% for this customer. So
you're describing a kind of survey of a customer, and that is like if that's logical and impactful and relatively easy to do, why did the company not do it themselves?
Yeah, so for a little bit of context here, so first we were engaged by the company to really broadly look at customer experience kind of across the spectrum, across all divisions. And this particular division that was in charge of the mailer, they had historically seen 8-9% growth rates on the top line. And so this is an area that was kind of ignored previously because it was so successful. And so that gets a little bit to, this is something where, if you don't have that area of focus and a different way of kind of looking at the data, then you may not have seen this before. But then the other part of this, beyond why they hadn't done it before, is why we were so successful in this piece. And I think one thing that was critical here is we were able to get access to a new piece of data. If I specifically, personally interviewed prospective customers about their other interactions with competitors, and this is something that was again a new piece of data and something that as a third party we were able to access that this company probably would have otherwise not been able to get access to really compare themselves in the market and see that there was an opportunity that existed there. So
So you're talking about nothing nefarious or anything like that, but almost like a covert sort of interview process, right? Or what?
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily say covert, but it's when you're a third party, it's a little bit of a different place that you can come from of trying to get an unbiased opinion rather than, being like, oh, the former competitor is interviewing me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. So that sort of exercise, that type of survey, it's good at gathering market intelligence. Sounds like in that case delivers some good actionable information. But let's talk about a couple other things. You mentioned other short-term levers that you could pull, sales channels, pricing, whatever. Take a minute and kind of download on those.
Yeah, I think that the sales channel one is a good example of. I was actually thinking of a little bit different than the first example of I was working with a client on an operational transformation, and one of the things that came up in that, separate from the project that we were on, was customer conversations and surveys that they'd done identified that on-time delivery performance was not meeting expectations, and so customers were specifically saying that they couldn't count on this company to deliver the product when they needed it, and that's why they weren't ordering as much. And so
was that you mean we made a delivery commitment and we didn't meet it, or okay?
Yeah, so actually, in this particular instance, the company is able to, once the order is received, say, I will get that to you in 6 weeks, and that 6 weeks is the number that the customer feedback was, you're not hitting that 6-week number that you gave me, and therefore I can't plan around it. So you've seen a reduction in my sales. And so I went and talked to the sales team. They agreed that this was one of the things causing an issue with their ability to compete in the marketplace. And so with this client, it was actually an operational focus initiative that we drove, which was working with supply chain and production teams on improving processes for on-time delivery. So they actually started, when we looked at the data, around 40 to 50% on-time delivery of hitting that 6-week number that I just mentioned. And after a couple of months and the processes that we put in place, and putting a focus on it, we were able to get that to the 80 to 90% range. And what you saw, as you would probably expect in that case, is customer feedback started to improve. They said, we notice you've made a commitment to this. And that translated to additional products being purchased by the customers that had previously said they weren't going to purchase from us. And so sales got a significant boost as a result of an operational initiative in this case, which I actually think is worth calling out specifically, because you think of top line or growing the top line. We talk often about sales and this focus on revenue, but in this particular instance, you had to have a holistic view of the company in order to really solve the problem that was taking place. So it wasn't just the sales team that was doing something incorrectly. It was really the entire organization needing to get together and come up with, the customers are telling us this, and we're going to take that feedback and really look holistically at what we can do to solve the issue.
Okay. You also mentioned pricing, and pricing is you could have a whole, postgraduate semester course on pricing. So I know it's kind of a big lift, but give some basic thoughts on that.
Yeah, pricing is one where it never ceases to amaze me how it's almost an afterthought in a lot of cases of, there may have been a lot of effort that initially went into setting the price. But then when you think of updating that price, it's, oftentimes you find just, oh, well, we'll attach some sort of inflation percentage onto it. And it's not necessarily taking into account that market dynamics may shift consistently from year to year or over certainly the course of a 5 to 10 year period. And so it's worth revisiting. And I'll just comment that when I say price here, I'm actually thinking, retail price plus sales discounts or less sales discounts, promotions, rebates, et cetera. So I don't want to talk about just a high level price. I'm really thinking of what's that end unit revenue number that a manufacturer actually sees. And so I can give an example of, I was actually recently working with a tire manufacturer where they got a new head of pricing. He came to us and said, I asked questions around here about why the prices are the way they are, and no one has a great answer for me. Can you just look into it for me and see what you find? And so we worked with the pricing and sales teams, gathered all the data over the last 3 years that went to customers. And interestingly, one of the first things that came out of this was we found that the pricing, the margin, the volume data by customer was actually housed in a separate system from where all of the sales discounts, rebates, incentives were housed and applied at the end of the year. And so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Of one of the things that was very apparent after you applied all of the sales incentives and put them into the same system together is that nobody had a great understanding of what the true margin data was at the end of the year for a given customer. And then the other thing that we saw is that when you looked at the customers and you actually applied all of the incentives, found that smaller customers were getting better deals than larger customers in some cases. And so, this led us to an exercise of, let's sit down, take a look at it, and really come up with what do we think the prices should be at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day, but after everything is applied. And then let's go through and simplify the process and eliminate a lot of the clutter and lack of transparency that exists in the process. So that's what we did there.
Okay. Just trying to make sure we kind of stick to our 20-minute roughly. I'm gonna ask a final question here. So you've talked about a number of, and I know there's many more out there, sort of short-term levers that are probably really important and impactful, but they're not necessarily as exciting as you mentioned Apple earlier, or you think about Amazon, or like something completely different, some bold move that has a transformative impact on the business and really alters it. Not really talking about that level, that's the total home run kind of example, but talk a little bit to how one might go about thinking of changing the top line through new innovative things that go beyond kind of the levers you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not necessarily true that everyone out there can be the next Amazon or the next Apple, but there is a process, and certainly a lot of companies are asking the question of where are places that I can get truly innovative and that are big ideas that I may or may not be missing, that exist, that are available to my company. And so very specifically, I had a client come and said, what's the next big idea for us? I want to grow my business, and I'd just like some help to think through that. I mean, we've spent time as a management team coming up with ideas, but we'd just love an external perspective or somebody to really go through and critique the business and see if something there exists. And so where this really starts is with assessing the company's strengths and competitive advantages. And this is, via interviews, internal data analysis, and then looking at, near end markets or markets that are adjacent, new customer opportunities that may exist. Mm-hmm. And ultimately what you come up with there is, based on what the company can do and the capabilities that exist and what the market data is telling you might be an opportunity, here's where your quote unquote right to win is, that exists within the marketplace. And then from there, it becomes a financial exercise of, we went through what is the size of each of these opportunities in a theoretical state. What investments are needed to achieve the success? What is the risk profile around each of these? And then what do I need to believe as a business leader in order to pursue this opportunity? So does it come down to some sort of M&A opportunity, or is it organic growth that can achieve this and therefore has better returns on the back end? But going back to, this is really a collaborative effort. And so we laid all of this out and then worked with leadership and the board of directors in this case to
and it's also kind of it's a process, really, what you're describing.
Yes.
Like there's almost a science to innovation in a way.
I don't know that, yeah. I mean, so you could, it certainly, there is a process that you should take, and you want to, there's a set of questions that I think can be asked that can help at least get the thinking and get the certain things addressed that are helpful in going through this exercise. And so we sat down with the leadership and the board of directors and went through the strategic playbook and the opportunities. And just for context on where we landed here, it wasn't necessarily the next Amazon, but in this particular example, there were very strong business cases built around, them building a new plant that was going to open up new geographies that they would all of a sudden have access to. An ancillary business unit that was identified that had kind of been underachieving, but also underinvested in, that actually had significant growth opportunities and would allow them to unlock new customers. And then thirdly, some technologies that they had that, again, they'd kind of been using for the specific purpose that they were intended to use, but that were actually very competitive in other markets that were close in, that they actually already had customers in, so they could leverage those technology capabilities and identify new growth opportunities. And together, those were actually, a pretty substantial impact on both the top and bottom lines for the business.
Cool. Well, I think we've run over on our time. I know there's a lot more there, but so I'm just going to wrap it here. Ryan, appreciate the insights and perspective. We appreciate the viewers. We're always open to engaging in dialogue with folks on problems they're facing or opportunities that they're looking at. And with that, I will sign off. Thank you.
Thank you.